whatever you do, do not draft these players. Welcome back to the Dynasty Nerds YouTube page. My name is Garret Price, and okay, maybe I was being a little dramatic. Look, everybody has a price. When I say do not draft these players, that doesn't mean you shouldn't get them on your team or you can't have them on your team. Basically, all it means is where they're going right now in rookie drafts, it's just too high. It's not worth it. There are other players, other assets that are much more valuable in the range that you're going to have to draft these guys. So that's what I mean when I say do not draft these players. Could you end up having them on your team still? Sure. Could they end up being solid assets? Sure. Just we think that the other assets in that same range are just a little bit better. I've got 2 running backs and 2 wide receivers in this class that I just don't think they're worth the right price. And looking at it, let's start at the very tippy top. Let's go with Blake Corum. Now, Blake Corum the good. Yes, he was drafted in the 3rd round. We only had 4 running backs go on day 2. So, yeah, that's a positive thing. The problem is because of the need at running back, guys are getting pushed higher and higher and higher and higher. I have heard 2 separate cases in Superflex Dynasty leagues where Blake Corum has snuck into the 1st round, one at 110 and one at 112. So, yeah, he's getting pushed up quite a bit. But ADP-wise, even though he's not averaging that draft position, he's still going fairly high overall. He's currently going at roughly pick 18 overall. That's the middle of your 2nd round. And while, yeah, it's not terrible to take somebody with upside in the 2nd round. And look, could I understand it? Sure. I think there's a lot of players with some more upside in that current range, particularly 2 running backs that are going 5, 6, 7 spots behind him in ADP in Jalen Wright and Marshawn Lloyd. I would much rather have both of those guys in their situations with their talent than I would Blake Corum. When I gave nerd scores out, both of those guys I thought on tape were better players, and I like their landing spots even better. Blake Corum's going to a spot where he's going to have to deal with Kyren Williams. Kyren Williams was the fantasy running back 2 on a points per game basis last year. He was really freaking good. Will he cut into that workload? Sure. Is he going to cut into a point where he's going to be fantasy relevant? More than likely not. All right, at pick 23, so just a few picks behind Blake Corum, who we just talked about, we've got Troy Franklin. Troy Franklin, another one where he's just going way too high. He's also going ahead of both those running backs, Lloyd and Wright, and I don't get it at all. Look, I know that there's some leftover thoughts of, man, he was supposed to be a round 1 talent. Oh, he was supposed to be a day 2 talent. Well, regardless of what we thought, the NFL said no. He's a day 3 guy. He fell to the 2nd pick of the 4th round. And while, sure, there's some times where guys fall and they still work out later, more often than not, day 3 wide receivers are really, really tricky and really, really finicky and don't typically end up being great fantasy football assets. So with a guy like Troy Franklin, yes, I know he got his old quarterback back in Bo Nix, but Bo Nix isn't Caleb Williams. He's not Jaden Daniels. It's not a great landing spot for him to go to. Maybe he'll make some big plays, but guys that are big play wide receivers in today's cover 2 age where we have 2 high safeties, they just don't tend to make as many of those big plays. The NFL is trying to limit those big plays. They want you to check the ball down, throw the ball underneath, and that's just not Troy Franklin's game. He had the slowest 10-yard split in the class, which means in short areas, he's not getting open. He needs that long speed, that long lane to make plays. So, yeah, there'll be some games where he has 2 touchdowns, but more often than not, you're going to be seeing 2 to 3 catches for 30 to 40 yards, and you're going to end up being pretty disappointed. Next one on the list is Braelon Allen. Now, Braelon Allen is slipping to the early part of the 3rd round, to the mid part of the 3rd round. And I know you're saying, Garrett, why do you have a do not draft guy in the 3rd round? At that point, who cares? Just take who you want. Well, the reason I have him there is it's a really weird situation. One, I didn't love his tape. I didn't think he was a super explosive back. He's already behind the arguably one of the most talented running backs in the NFL right now in Breece Hall. So there's not a clear path to playing time anytime soon. And you add into the fact that there's a lot of other running backs that look and play very similar to how Braelon Allen does. You look at Abanikanda, he's a big guy, but more explosive. You look at Isaiah Davis. Isaiah Davis is a lot like a Braelon Allen. So it's a really weird, muddied backfield behind them. And if there was any room, it would be, oh, well, maybe he'll give them some touches on third down here and there. And no, Braelon Allen's not the best catcher of the football. So he's just in a spot where it's just, the juice just isn't worth the squeeze. You look at some other running backs in that similar range that are going, actually not even similar range, rounds later. I would much rather have Bucky Irving, who's going a few picks later. I would rather have Kamani Vidal, who's going almost a round later. And I would way rather a Ray Davis, who's going a round and a half later, and Rasheen Ali and Tyrone Tracy, who's going 2 rounds later. These are all other guys with day 3 draft capital that I think are just as good, if not better, as far as players and situations. I saved the best for last because he is the best player on this list, but he's one that really worries me. He's a guy that's just on the fringes of being taken in the first round right now of your startup drafts. And I'm saying we've got to avoid this guy, and it's Keon Coleman. Look, I know the pressers have been freaking hilarious. I love guys that can have a good time up there, have fun. And there are things in this game that are really good. And the things that are good are so good. But here's the worry. We've already heard the Buffalo Bills come out and say that Keon Coleman, he's not going to be running out of the slot. That's going to be for Curtis Samuel and Khalil Shakir. And somebody of his play style where, yeah, he's got great hands, but his route running is lacking and his release isn't very good. And you look at his 40, he's not super bursty. So we're basically looking at a player that he's going to be able to be shut down by top corners pretty easily, except for in rare situations where it's a perfectly thrown ball that he can jump up and get over. Most quarterbacks aren't willing to do that very often. They would much rather get it to the guy that has some separation versus a guy that has to do a jump ball thing. Now, if he's in the middle of the field, going up against nickel corners, going against linebackers, safeties, getting to find dead spots in the zone, I'd feel way better about Keon Coleman. But right now in this situation, it doesn't look good for Keon Coleman, in my opinion.